I never thought my own daughter would look me straight in the eye and tell me she wished I was dead. It wasn't shouted in anger. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was calm, calculated, almost rehearsed. Her exact words? The best gift would be if you just died. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The kitchen around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of coffee, everything blurred into silence. My hands trembled against the table. I told myself I must have misheard, but no. She repeated it slower this time, as if she wanted each word to carve itself into me. I froze. My daughter, my Claire, my only child, the girl I'd raised after losing my husband, was looking at me with eyes so cold I barely recognized her. I wanted to believe it was a joke, some cruel attempt at sarcasm. But there was no smirk, no hesitation. Just a quiet, venomous certainty. "Claire," I whispered, my voice cracking. "What? What did you just say?" She shrugged, reached for her phone, and muttered, "You heard me." Like it was nothing. Like she hadn't just shattered the very foundation of our bond. Inside, my heart broke into pieces. I'd sacrificed everything for her. Every penny I earned, every extra hour I worked, every sleepless night. I poured it all into giving her the life I never had. Education, travel, comfort. I told myself it was worth it. Because someday she would look back and know her mother loved her more than anything. And now, she was telling me my death would be the greatest gift. I couldn't even muster anger. Only disbelief. My mind spun with memories, her first recital, her late-night study sessions, her teenage tantrums. I had weathered all of it, thinking it was part of raising a child alone. But this was different. The air in the kitchen grew heavier. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, louder and louder, as though counting down to something I wasn't ready for. I tried to laugh it off, to give her an escape. "You don't mean that, honey. You're just upset, maybe tired." But she glanced at me, her lips curling just enough to show satisfaction. "Maybe I do mean it," she said. "Maybe you'd finally be useful if you weren't around." My chest tightened. Those words were a dagger. She wasn't lashing out in the heat of the moment. She was deliberate. Testing me, watching how I'd react. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, forcing air into my lungs. I told myself not to show fear, not to give her the power of seeing me crumble. But inside I was unraveling. She got up, stretched casually, and walked upstairs, leaving me in that kitchen with a silence so sharp it rang in my ears. I sat there for hours, staring at the half-finished birthday cake I'd baked for her. The frosting had started to melt. The candles never got lit. I had wanted the evening to be about celebration, laughter, maybe even a rare hug. Instead, it became the night my daughter revealed the darkest corner of her heart. I should have confronted her immediately, demanded answers, but something inside me warned me to stay quiet, to wait. Because if she truly meant what she said, then there had to be a reason. Nobody wakes up one morning and tells their mother to die without motive. And slowly, painfully, memories began to surface, moments I had brushed aside before. The phone calls she ended the second I walked into the room. The new designer purse she insisted was on sale, though I knew she couldn't afford it. The way she often dismissed my budgeting, calling it pathetic penny pinching. Little signs I had ignored. Signs I couldn't afford to ignore anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body trembling with equal parts fear and grief. Every creak of the house felt amplified. Every shadow in the hallway seemed menacing. And then I remembered. In her drawer, months ago, I'd seen an envelope with the name of a law firm scrawled across the front. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was this connected? Was my daughter already planning something? Something that involved my death not just as a cruel wish, but as part of a plan? I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to calm the racing of my heart. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'll start looking for answers. But as I whispered those words into the dark, another thought slipped in, one I couldn't shake. What if tomorrow was already too late? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I barely slept that night. My daughter's words. The best gift would be if you just died, clawed at me until dawn. By the time the sun rose, my chest ached from holding in so many questions. I kept asking myself if I had imagined it, if maybe she was just being dramatic. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, Claire came down the stairs as though nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee, humming softly, scrolling through her phone. Not a glance in my direction. Not an ounce of regret. My throat tightened as I watched her. My child, who should have been my comfort in life, moving around like a stranger who had already buried me in her mind. I told myself to stay calm, to watch, to listen. Over the next few days, I noticed little things I'd never paid attention to before. Claire was always on her phone, always whispering. Sometimes she slipped into the hallway, her back turned toward me, her voice hushed but sharp. I couldn't catch full sentences, just fragments. When it happens, one night, she won't fight it, another. And once, clear as day, the money will be mine. Each time my stomach sank lower. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, but something stopped me. I needed to be sure. If I accused her too soon, she'd just call me paranoid. She was clever like that, always ready to twist words back on me. Later that week, she came home with a brand new handbag. Designer, glossy leather, the kind I knew cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I asked her casually, trying to keep my voice steady. That's beautiful, Claire. Where did you get it? She didn't even blink. On sale, she said, tossing it onto the couch like it was nothing. But I knew better. I'd worked in retail long enough to recognize the logo, the stitching. That bag wasn't on sale anywhere. Someone bought it for her, or she bought it with money I didn't know she had. That night, while she showered, I tiptoed into her room. My hands shook as I opened her dresser drawer. Beneath a pile of scarves, I found receipts crumpled together. Restaurant bills, boutique purchases, even jewelry. Each one dated within the past few weeks, far beyond what she could afford on her small stipend. And then I saw it, tucked inside an envelope, half buried under makeup samples. The same law firm's name I'd glimpsed months ago. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't some random paper lying around. It was deliberate. A reminder that she'd been in contact with lawyers. I slipped the envelope back where I found it, my pulse hammering in my ears. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. The next afternoon, I called Susan, my oldest friend. She had known me since before Claire was born. She was steady, practical, the kind of person who didn't overreact. If I told her my fears and she brushed them off, maybe I really was imagining things. When Susan arrived, I poured her tea and, with trembling hands, laid it all out. The cruel birthday remark, the phone calls, the expensive gifts, the receipts, the law firm. She listened silently, her brow furrowed deeper with every word. Finally, she set her cup down. "Margaret," she said softly, "I don't think you're imagining anything. I think Claire is planning something, and you need to protect yourself." Her words sent a shiver through me. Hearing someone else say it made it real. That evening, I tried to test Claire, gently, without revealing what I knew. I asked about her future plans, where she saw herself in 5 years. She rolled her eyes, muttering, "I'll be fine once money isn't such a problem." Then she glanced at me with a sharp little smile and added, "Soon enough, it won't be." The way she said it, not hopeful, not dreamy, certain. I forced a nod, pretending not to notice the edge in her voice. But inside, my blood ran cold. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling once again, I realized I was standing on the edge of something much bigger than a cruel remark. Claire wasn't just angry. She was preparing, planning, positioning herself for a future that didn't include me. And tomorrow, I would find out exactly what that lawyer's envelope meant. The next morning, I couldn't stop staring at that envelope in my mind. The law firm's name was etched there as clearly as if it were burned into my memory. I needed answers, and I knew I wouldn't get them by asking Claire directly. She'd laugh in my face, twist my words, maybe even accuse me of losing my mind. So, after breakfast, when she left to meet friends, I grabbed my purse and drove downtown. My palms were sweating against the steering wheel the entire way. I had never done anything like this before, snooping behind my own daughter's back. But the fear gnawed at me. I had to know. The office was small, tucked between a dentist and a dry cleaner. The nameplate outside matched the envelope exactly. My heart thudded as I pushed open the glass door. The waiting area smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. A receptionist with sharp red nails smiled at me, not knowing I was about to ask a question that could change everything. I'm interested in estate planning, I told her, forcing a polite smile. Could I speak with someone about that? Minutes later, a man in his 40s walked out. Crisp suit, practiced smile. I'm Mr. Turner, please come in. His office was neat, too neat. Legal books lined the walls. A single-framed diploma hung behind him. I sat across from him, trying to keep my breathing steady. We spoke casually at first. He explained wills, trusts, power of attorney. But then, carefully, I shifted the conversation. I was just wondering, do you often work with younger clients? Say people in their 20s? He gave me a brief smile. Occasionally, yes. Children sometimes come in to understand what their rights would be as heirs. Perfectly normal curiosity. Perfectly normal. My stomach tightened. I pressed gently. And if someone wanted to know what they'd inherit before their parent passed, would you discuss that? He leaned back slightly, his smile never faltering. We answer hypothetical questions all the time. It doesn't mean anything sinister, just curiosity. But there was something in his tone, something too smooth, too rehearsed. My hands gripped the edge of the chair. I couldn't push further without exposing myself, so I left, thanking him with a tight smile. But as I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, pressing down on me. Claire hadn't just spoken to a lawyer. She had sat in that office, maybe in that very chair, asking about my assets. On the drive home, memories collided in my mind. Claire's late-night whispers, her new designer things, her smug confidence when she said soon money wouldn't be a problem. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was real. That evening, I tried to test the waters again. I asked her about her studies, her plans after graduation. She slammed her phone down and snapped, "Why do you care? You'll be gone before it matters." The words sliced through me. For a second, I couldn't even respond. She didn't mean gone as in traveling. She meant dead. She wasn't hiding it anymore. Later that night, when she was asleep, I went through the stack of mail she had left on the counter. That's when I saw it, a bank statement addressed to her. My eyes darted over the numbers. She had taken out a loan, a large one. But what froze my blood was the collateral listed. My property. My own home. The roof over my head. I staggered back, clutching the paper. How? How could she tie my name to her loan without my consent? Had she forged something? Or had someone guided her through it? Someone like that smooth-talking lawyer? My legs felt weak as I sat at the kitchen table, the statement shaking in my hands. My daughter wasn't just dreaming of a life without me. She was gambling with mine while I was still alive. The next morning, I planned to confront her. But as she walked past me with her phone pressed to her ear, I caught just one phrase, crystal clear. Don't worry. She won't be a problem much longer. I froze in place. My breath caught in my throat. What did she mean by that? Was it just bravado? Or had the countdown already begun? Her words echoed in my head. She won't be a problem much longer. That night, I barely moved from the kitchen table. The bank statement lay in front of me like a death sentence. I wanted to believe she was bluffing, speaking carelessly, but the certainty in her tone chilled me. Claire wasn't alone in this. Someone was guiding her. Someone older, smarter, more dangerous. By the next morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to know who she was meeting when she disappeared for hours. I'd been too passive, too trusting. Now I needed proof. So I followed her. That Friday evening, she left the house dressed far too elegantly for a casual night with friends. A silk blouse, heels, the new handbag. She didn't notice me tailing her car, keeping 2 vehicles behind. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Every stoplight felt like a test of my nerves. She pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant, one I hadn't stepped foot in since my husband was alive. My throat tightened as I watched her step out of the car. adjusting her blouse in the reflection of the window. And then he appeared. A man in his late 50s, tall, with a slick gray suit and the kind of self-satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. He greeted her with a kiss, not on the cheek but on the lips. My heart lurched. This wasn't a mentor. This wasn't a friend. This was a lover. I stayed in my car, my body trembling, watching as they walked inside together. My daughter, the child I had raised with every ounce of love I had left, was not only betraying me, but aligning herself with a man old enough to be her father. I waited, pulse racing, until they emerged nearly 2 hours later. Through the car window, I watched them pause under a street lamp. Claire leaned into him, her voice sharp but eager. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments as the night air carried them. "She's dragging this out. A patience, Claire. You'll have it all soon." The man's hand slid across her back like a snake. She nodded, her face lit with a hunger I had never seen before. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. I pulled out my phone, fumbling, and managed to record a few seconds of their exchange. Just enough to capture his voice, steady and manipulative, telling her to apply pressure and reminding her that the money will be worth it. It was all I could do not to burst out of the car, to scream at him, to drag her home. But I forced myself to stay still. I needed more than anger. I needed evidence. The next morning, I met Susan at a small cafe and showed her the recording. Her face paled as she listened. "Margaret," she whispered, "that man isn't just after Claire's affection. He's after your estate. He's filling her head with poison because he wants control of your money." Her words struck like lightning. I realized then that Claire wasn't entirely the mastermind. She was being used, encouraged to resent me, to see me as an obstacle instead of her mother. And she was letting him do it. Later that week, Claire returned late, smelling faintly of expensive cologne that wasn't hers. I asked where she'd been. She smirked, brushing past me. "Out! Don't wait up next time." I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake the truth out of her. But instead, I clenched my fists and asked softly, "Who is he, Claire?" She froze just for a second. Then her eyes narrowed and she hissed, "Stay out of my life, Mom. You wouldn't understand." Her tone was full of venom, but beneath it I heard fear. She knew I was onto her. That night I sat awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My daughter was in the grip of a man who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. He was fueling her hatred, her greed, her reckless confidence. And if I didn't act soon, he'd succeed. But the question tearing at me wasn't just how to stop him. It was this: was my daughter a victim in his game, or had she chosen her side willingly? That question haunted me for days. Was Claire simply being manipulated, or had she willingly chosen to betray me? I wanted to believe my daughter was still good at her core, that she was blinded, tricked, swept up in this older man's poisonous influence. But the evidence piling up told another story. Later that week, I forced myself to sit down with my bank. I needed clarity. Something in my gut told me the strange withdrawals I'd seen weren't isolated mistakes. The branch manager, a kind man who'd known me for years, pulled my records. His brow furrowed almost immediately. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, "there have been multiple transfers from your account in the last month. Were you aware of these?" My stomach dropped. "What transfers?" He turned the screen toward me. There it was in black and white. Several withdrawals, each a few $1,000s. Not enough to instantly bankrupt me, but together, the sum was staggering. I stared at the page, my pulse roaring in my ears. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible. I never approved these." He leaned forward. "Each transaction required a signature, and we have them on file." My hands shook as I looked at the forms he slid across the desk. My signature, or at least, something that looked like it. My name written in careful strokes but slightly off. The loop of the G in Margaret was tighter. The H in Hayes tilted just enough to make me sick. Forgery. I pressed my hand to my mouth, holding back a cry. The manager lowered his voice. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm obligated to report this if you want to pursue it. Do you know who might have done this?" I swallowed hard. The image of Claire flashed in my mind, Her smug smile, her silk blouse, the older man's hand resting on her back. My throat closed. I couldn't say it aloud. Not yet. I'll think about it, I whispered. On the drive home, my grip on the steering wheel trembled. My own daughter had forged my name. She hadn't just wished me dead, she was already stealing from me while I was still alive. That evening, Susan came over. I spread the forged documents on the table, my voice breaking as I explained what the bank had shown me. Her face hardened. Margaret, this isn't just greed. This is a crime. And that man she's seeing, he's behind it. He's probably guiding her step by step. Susan's words gave me both strength and terror. If he was coaching her, then this wasn't going to stop at a few forged checks. They had bigger plans. I needed more information, so I hired a private investigator. Quietly, carefully. A man Susan recommended, someone she trusted. He promised to dig into Dalton, the older man, and see what skeletons he kept hidden. Days later, the investigator called me. His voice was steady, but what he told me made my blood run cold. Dalton had a history. He'd been sued twice in the past, for fraud, for coercing women into shady financial deals. Each time he slipped away without charges sticking. He was a predator, and now he had his hooks in my daughter. I hung up, my body trembling. I wanted to believe Claire was an innocent pawn, but the truth was harder to ignore. She wasn't resisting him. She was following his lead, and together they were targeting me. That night I confronted her, carefully without revealing too much. Claire, I asked, have you been using my accounts? Signing anything in my name? She laughed. Oh, Mom, you're imagining things again. Maybe you should see someone about your memory. The words sliced deeper than any knife. She didn't deny it. She mocked me. And as she walked upstairs, tossing her hair over her shoulder, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear, "Soon, you won't even be able to stop it." I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my fists clenched, my heart pounding. Stop what? What exactly were they planning that I was already too late to prevent? Her words kept replaying in my head. Soon, you won't even be able to stop it. I lay awake that night, staring into the dark, wondering what it was. A forged document? Another withdrawal? Or something worse, something final? Every shadow on my ceiling felt like a warning. By the next morning, I'd made a decision. Enough hiding. Enough silence. If Claire wanted to play games with my life and my future, then I would confront her, but not in private, where she could twist my words and deny everything. I would do it in front of others. People who couldn't ignore the truth. It just so happened that a family gathering was scheduled that weekend. My sister was hosting a dinner to celebrate her anniversary, and nearly everyone would be there. Cousins, uncles, aunts. Claire had already confirmed she would attend, and from the pit of my stomach I knew this would be my moment. The evening of the dinner, I drove over with a folder in my bag, bank statements, copies of the forged signatures, and the recording I'd captured of her and Dalton. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I hated the thought of exposing my own daughter. But what choice did I have? If I stayed silent, she'd keep draining me until there was nothing left. The house buzzed with laughter and music when I arrived. The smell of roast chicken and garlic bread filled the air. Relatives hugged me warmly, glasses clinking, voices cheerful. For a moment I envied them, their ease, their ignorance. They didn't know that beneath my smile, my world was collapsing. Claire walked in 30 minutes later, her arm looped around Dalton's. My stomach knotted as gasps rippled through the room. Most relatives assumed he was some kind of mentor or sponsor. Only I knew the truth. Claire looked radiant, almost smug, basking in the attention. Dalton shook hands confidently, his charm so smooth it made me sick. I waited until after dinner, when the wine glasses were full and conversation flowed easily. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood up, my folder clutched tightly in my hand. "Everyone," I said, my voice steady but trembling inside. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out." The room quieted. Eyes turned toward me. Claire froze, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Dalton's smile barely faltered. I opened the folder and laid the documents on the table. These are bank withdrawals. Transfers I never authorized. My signature was forged. And these, I held up the pages, are the proof. Gasps erupted. My sister leaned forward, her brows knitted in shock. Margaret, forged? By who? I swallowed hard, my voice catching. By Claire, my daughter. The room went still. For a second, I thought time itself had stopped. Claire's face flushed red, then quickly hardened. You're insane, she spat, her voice rising. You're paranoid, delusional. You've been losing it for years, and now you're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone. She grabbed one of the papers and waved it in the air. Look at this. Anyone could have copied her signature. How do you know it wasn't a scammer? Why are you blaming me? Murmurs spread across the table. Some relatives glanced at me with pity, others at her with doubt. I steadied my breath and pulled out my phone. Because I heard you. I recorded you. I played the short clip, the one of her with Dalton, his voice instructing her to be patient, hers laced with greed. The sound filled the room. Claire's jaw dropped. Dalton's smile finally cracked. But instead of apologizing, Claire turned the accusation back on me. You've been spying on me? Snooping? Recording me like some kind of criminal? Maybe you really are losing your mind. Dalton placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Then he spoke smoothly to the room. Margaret, I think what we're seeing here is a mother who's struggling. It happens with age, paranoia, confusion. Perhaps it's time to talk about whether she can still manage her affairs responsibly. My knees nearly buckled. The way he said it, so calm, so calculated, planted seeds of doubt in the minds around me. And then Claire, emboldened, added, Yes, that's exactly what I've been worried about. She's unstable. She needs help. And maybe it's time we step in legally before she ruins everything. The room filled with whispers. Eyes that once held sympathy now flickered with uncertainty. I clutched the edge of the table, my pulse racing. What started as my attempt to expose them had flipped. Suddenly, I was the one on trial. And as I looked at their faces, I realized with a sinking heart, they might actually succeed. The silence after Claire's words was louder than any scream. Maybe it's time we step in legally before she ruins everything. Her accusation didn't just sting, it sliced. And the way my relative's eyes shifted, some doubtful, some uncomfortable, told me she had planted her seed of poison deep. That night, I went home trembling. I barely slept, turning over every possibility in my mind. If she and Dalton pursued legal action, they could strip me of control over my own finances, even my home. The thought of Claire, my own daughter, petitioning the court to declare me incompetent, it made me nauseous. The next morning, my fear became reality. A thick envelope arrived, legal papers. Claire and Dalton had filed a petition. They were asking the court to appoint a conservator over my estate, over me. I sat at my kitchen table, the document spread out, my vision blurring with tears. Dalton's hand was all over this. The language was too polished, too strategic. They claimed I was exhibiting signs of mental decline, making irrational accusations, and jeopardizing the family's stability. Every line was an insult dressed as concern. Susan came over within the hour. Her face turned red with anger as she read through the pages. Margaret, they're trying to take everything. If this sticks, you'll lose your rights to your money, your house, everything. You need a lawyer. A good one. Later that week, I met with Mr. Keaton, a sharp but compassionate attorney Susan recommended. He listened quietly as I poured out the whole story, the forged signatures, the recordings, the family dinner. His eyes narrowed as he examined the petition. They're playing dirty, he said finally, but it's not unbeatable. You have evidence and that gives us leverage. Still, you need to prepare yourself. Cases like this, they get ugly. They'll attack your credibility at every turn. His words weighed heavily on me, but I nodded. I can't let them win. The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the longest of my life. Every time the phone rang, I expected another blow. I avoided family gatherings, too ashamed to face the relatives who might believe Claire's lies. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, replaying her laughter, Dalton's smug calm, the whispers in that dining room. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. I sat beside Mr. Keaton, my hands trembling, while Claire and Dalton sat across the aisle. She looked composed, almost polished, like a dutiful daughter reluctantly doing the right thing. Dalton's expression was unreadable, but his confidence radiated. When the judge entered, my heart pounded in my ears. The proceedings began, and Dalton's lawyer wasted no time painting me as unstable. He described me as confused, paranoid, and potentially harmful to her own estate. Every word made me want to scream, but Mr. Keaton squeezed my arm gently, reminding me to stay calm. Then Claire took the stand. Hearing her voice, steady, sweet, dripping with false concern, was unbearable. "I love my mother," she said softly, "but she's not herself anymore. She imagines things. She thinks I'm stealing from her, but it's just... her memory isn't reliable. I only want to protect her." My throat tightened. Protect me? By robbing me blind. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, my knees weak but my resolve firm. Mr. Keaton guided me through my testimony, and I presented the forged documents, the bank's confirmation, and, most damning, the recording. The courtroom grew still as Dalton's voice echoed through the speakers, instructing Claire, her own voice agreeing. Claire's mask cracked for the first time. She shifted in her seat, her cheeks flushing, but Dalton leaned in close to her, whispering something that steadied her. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "This evidence raises serious concerns. But I need more. I want to hear directly from the bank representative. We'll reconvene next week with witness testimony." My stomach lurched. It wasn't over. I hadn't lost, but I hadn't won either. As we filed out of the courtroom, Dalton caught my eye. His lips curled into the faintest smile, as if to say, "You think you're ahead, but this isn't finished." And in that moment, I realized he still had something left to play. Something I hadn't uncovered yet. Dalton's smile followed me out of the courtroom like a shadow. It wasn't the grin of a man who'd been caught. It was the grin of a man who knew something I didn't. That night, I couldn't eat. Couldn't rest. I kept asking myself, what card does he still have up his sleeve? He wasn't rattled by the recording. He wasn't shaken by the forged signatures. No, he looked like a man with insurance. Something bigger. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harlan, the private investigator I had hired weeks ago. His tone was urgent. "Mrs. Hayes, I've found something. We need to meet in person." I drove to his office that afternoon, the late autumn air biting at my skin as I hurried inside. His office smelled of old coffee and printer ink, papers stacked neatly in rows. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a thick file across the desk. "This," he said, "is Dalton's real history, and you need to see it before your next hearing." I opened the file with trembling fingers. Inside were arrest records, court transcripts, and financial statements. My stomach turned. Dalton had a trail of destruction behind him. 3 women, all older, all financially stable. Each one had been systematically drained of money. Each case ended the same way. Lawsuits that vanished, settlements sealed, and Dalton walking away untouched. The most chilling part was the pattern. He targeted women through their children, seduced daughters, manipulated sons, then used them to wedge his way into the family's wealth. My throat tightened as I flipped the pages. This wasn't just about me. Claire was his puppet, and she wasn't the first. But the investigator wasn't finished. He pulled out one last document, a property record. Dalton had recently purchased land using a shell company, but the deed wasn't in his name. It was in Claire's. I froze. My daughter was listed as the sole owner of a small house 2 towns over. The purchase date? Just 3 weeks earlier. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice cracking. Mr. Harlan's eyes darkened. "It means he's setting her up. He makes it look like she's the independent buyer, but in reality, he controls everything. If your assets are taken from you, guess where they'll end up? Funneled through Claire's name, then siphoned back to him. And by the time anyone figures it out, he'll be gone. The room spun around me. Claire wasn't just helping Dalton. She was being groomed to take the fall when everything collapsed. I pressed my hands against my temples. She doesn't see it. She thinks she's in love. She thinks she's in control. Mr. Harlan's voice softened. You need to decide, Mrs. Hayes. Are you willing to expose your daughter publicly to save her from him and save yourself? I left his office with the file clutched tight to my chest, the cold air stinging my cheeks. Every step to my car felt heavier. I wanted to scream, to shake Claire until she saw what was happening. But I also knew, if I confronted her now, she'd just run deeper into his arms. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread before me. The evidence was damning. And yet, staring at my daughter's name on that property deed, I felt a sharp stab of grief. She wasn't just betraying me, she was being used as a pawn. The next hearing was only days away. My lawyer needed this information. But handing it over meant putting Claire directly in the line of fire. Would the judge see her as a victim or as an accomplice? As the clock ticked past midnight, I knew I had reached the breaking point. Either I expose her and risk destroying the last bond between us, or I stay silent and let Dalton bleed me dry until nothing remains. I folded the file slowly, my hands trembling, and in that moment, I realized, whichever choice I made, someone's life was about to be ruined. Dalton's smile followed me out of the courtroom like a shadow. It wasn't the grin of a man who'd been caught. It was the grin of a man who knew something I didn't. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't rest. I kept asking myself, what card does he still have up his sleeve? He wasn't rattled by the recording. He wasn't shaken by the forged signatures. No. He looked like a man with insurance, something bigger. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harlan, the private investigator I had hired weeks ago. His tone was urgent. Mrs. Hayes, I found something. We need to meet in person. I drove to his office that afternoon, the late autumn air biting at my skin as I hurried inside. His office smelled of old coffee and printer ink, papers stacked neatly in rows. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a thick file across the desk. This, he said, is Dalton's real history, and you need to see it before your next hearing. I opened the file with trembling fingers. Inside were arrest records, court transcripts, and financial statements. My stomach turned. Dalton had a trail of destruction behind him. 3 women, all older, all financially stable. Each one had been systematically drained of money. Each case ended the same way. Lawsuits that vanished, settlements sealed, and Dalton walking away untouched. The most chilling part was the pattern. He targeted women through their children, seduced daughters, manipulated sons, then used them to wedge his way into the family's wealth. My throat tightened as I flipped the pages. This wasn't just about me. Claire was his puppet, and she wasn't the first. But the investigator wasn't finished. He pulled out one last document, a property record. Dalton had recently purchased land, using a shell company. But the deed wasn't in his name. It was in Claire's. I froze. My daughter was listed as the sole owner of a small house 2 towns over. The purchase date, just 3 weeks earlier. What does this mean? I asked, my voice cracking. Mr. Harlan's eyes darkened. It means he's setting her up. He makes it look like she's the independent buyer, but in reality, he controls everything. If your assets are taken from you, guess where they'll end up? Funneled through Claire's name, then siphoned back to him. And by the time anyone figures it out, he'll be gone. The room spun around me. Claire wasn't just helping Dalton. She was being groomed to take the fall when everything collapsed. I pressed my hands against my temples. She doesn't see it. She thinks she's in love. She thinks she's in control? Mr. Harlan's voice softened. You need to decide, Mrs. Hayes. Are you willing to expose your daughter publicly To save her from him and save yourself? I left his office with the file clutched tight to my chest, the cold air stinging my cheeks. Every step to my car felt heavier. I wanted to scream, to shake Claire until she saw what was happening. But I also knew, if I confronted her now, she'd just run deeper into his arms. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread before me. The evidence was damning. And yet, staring at my daughter's name on that property deed, I felt a sharp stab of grief. She wasn't just betraying me, she was being used as a pawn. The next hearing was only days away. My lawyer needed this information, but handing it over meant putting Claire directly in the line of fire. Would the judge see her as a victim or as an accomplice? As the clock ticked past midnight, I knew I had reached the breaking point. Either I expose her and risk destroying the last bond between us, or I stay silent and let Dalton bleed me dry until nothing remains. I folded the file slowly, my hands trembling, and in that moment, I realized, whichever choice I made, someone's life was about to be ruined. The judge's gavel still echoed in my chest long after we left the courthouse. Claire's arm was locked in Dalton's grip, her expression torn between anger and confusion. For the first time, though, I saw the mask slip. The doubt was there, flickering in her eyes like a flame fighting for air. That night, I sat on my porch as the sun bled into the horizon. My lawyer's words replayed in my mind. We bought time. But Dalton won't stop until he's cornered. He was right. Dalton wasn't the type to retreat. He would push until there was nothing left of me, or of Claire. 2 days later, the audit began. The bank combed through every transaction. The evidence stacked higher and higher against them, withdrawals disguised as gifts, payments rerouted through shell accounts, the property deed in Claire's name with Dalton's money behind it. Piece by piece, the truth came into focus, not just for the court, but for Claire. I'll never forget the moment she broke. We were both called in to review the audit. The investigator laid the documents out on the table. Dalton leaned back, smug, but the mask cracked when the paper trail tied directly to him. Claire stared down at the pages, her name printed again and again. Her hands trembled. "Dalton, what is this?" He chuckled, smooth as ever. "Don't worry about it. It's just paperwork." But she pressed harder. "Why is everything in my name? Why aren't you listed anywhere?" For once, he faltered. "Because it's cleaner this way. Safer. For us." Her face drained of color. She looked at me then, not with defiance, not with scorn, but with horror. The realization was dawning. She wasn't his partner. She was his shield, his scapegoat. When the court reconvened a week later, Claire walked in alone. Dalton was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he'd skipped town after catching wind of possible criminal charges. Typical predator, slipping away when the walls closed in. The judge's ruling was swift. Conservatorship denied. My accounts restored? The forged signatures documented as evidence of fraud. Dalton's name flagged for investigation. And Claire? Claire ordered to repay what she had taken, though the court acknowledged her role as a manipulated party. I should have felt victorious, but as Claire wept quietly across the aisle, her shoulders shaking, all I felt was the ache of a mother watching her child fall apart. Later that evening, she came to my house. She stood on my porch, mascara streaked, her eyes swollen from crying. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a broken whisper, she said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought he loved me. I thought I was in control." Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to scream at her for what she'd done, for the humiliation, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, but instead I just opened the door and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had once laid out the forged documents. This time there were no lies, just silence, broken by her quiet sobs and my shaky breaths. Forgiveness didn't come that night. Maybe it never fully would, but something shifted. She wasn't my enemy anymore. She was my daughter again, flawed, scarred, but no longer under Dalton's spell. In the weeks that followed, life settled slowly back into place. The relatives who once doubted me reached out with apologies. My lawyer closed the case with a satisfied smile. The house, the accounts, my independence, they were mine again. And me, I had changed. I learned that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It can come from the ones you love most. I learned that silence only feeds predators, and I learned that even when your world is stripped bare, you can still stand, still fight, still reclaim your name. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, I sat on my porch again. This time, Claire joined me. She didn't say much. She just sat quietly, her hand brushing against mine, as if to ask for a second chance without words. I exhaled slowly, letting the cool air steady me. The wounds were still there, but so was the strength. This was my story. Don't forget to subscribe.